Hello and welcome to the Modern Adventurer podcast, where explorers and adventurers tell their stories. Coming up.
But what made it really surreal was it was just so beautiful. And then you could see cars that were just recently blown up and just smoke coming, chimneys, smoke chimneys everywhere. But those were little villages that were being burned, or cars that were being burned, or bullet holes everywhere. It was just what is going on? And I remember all of a sudden, the truck stops, and then we hear first we hear the AK-47 bullets that pop, 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 pop. The truck stops, and all of a sudden I'm thinking what is going on right now? This is not what I signed up for. Thanks so much for having me on the show, John. Appreciate it.
Oh, it's an absolute pleasure. I've been meaning to get you on for so long, and your story is incredible, from sort of how you started and your first big adventure to what you're doing now. For the people at home who don't know who you are, I always like to start at the beginning and who you are and sort of how you got started into this sort of world of adventure that you do now.
Yeah, I appreciate that. So, I'm an eco explorer. So what that means to me is essentially I go on expeditions like a classical explorer, whether it's, I'm joining a research team or doing it to advocate for climate change or social injustices. So I typically go on expeditions that kind of bring light to those kinds of situations. And, also trying to promote a sustainable way of traveling, whether that's ecotourism or trying to promote ecotourism or eco-adventure travels. And that's kind of what my platform is all about and what I'm all about. My claim to fame really is my walk across Africa, which was a 2.5-year voyage from Cape Town to Cairo. And it was done entirely by foot, and 550 kilometers was done about, in Malawi by kayak. So that's kind of how everything really started, was my track walking along the length of Africa.
Wow. Yeah. I mean, it's an absolutely incredible story that you have to tell, and we'll sort of jump into that. But probably for people who don't know you, your sort of upbringing was sort of moving around from Germany, Canada, Turks and Caicos. Is that how you pronounce it?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, Turks and Caicos.
Turks and Caicos. And did that sort of moving around, discovering different places, different cultures, was that sort of how your love of adventures, sort of how it sort of came about?
I mean, absolutely. When I was a kid in Germany, we used to go out on these nature walks and nature playgrounds. It was very popular. It was my upbringing. So my first language and kind of my first real cultural experience is German. And, and Germans do like to go in the outdoors quite a lot. And then when we moved to the Turks and Caicos Islands, my brother, my mom, and my stepfather, we were kind of, we were a bit different than the rest of the folks on the island because I didn't really speak any English. And I'm just I look like an island boy who speaks German. And so me and my brother, what we would do is we would get together and go on these massive hikes every single day. We would just go in the bush and we would just forage and, eat all the local fruit, and we would go fishing. We eat the fresh fish, and we would kind of grill our food right there on the spot. And so the land became our playground. And so, that's kind of where my love or my comfort for the outdoors really began.
Oh, wow. Yeah, because it's an incredible sort of story, sort of moving around. And as you say, that sort of love of different places. What was the sort of your big trip, Africa? How did that sort of come about? Because it's an enormous undertaking that you took. And that was your first big one. You didn't go start small, you just went really big straight at the start. So, I mean, what was the sort of
Yeah.
planning and the sort of beginnings of that?
So I began planning this about 9 months prior to going to Africa. And, when I first started about it, I pretty much hit a kind of crisis in my life where I thought to myself, like, what am I doing with my life? And if I keep going in this direction, I'm going to be trapped here forever. So, I have two places to go. I can either continue doing this and be dead inside, or I can decide to choose life. And, by me choosing life, I started to look at my childhood and what really inspired me. And, there's a show, The Black Panther, in which T'Challa, before he became the king of Wakanda, he decided to go on this walkabout, which wasn't shown in the movie, but, there was that TV show back in the day. It was a cartoon TV show that was very unpopular. And, it was one of the only black superheroes that existed. So me and my brother would watch this religiously. And there is this episode in which where T'Challa decided to go on this walkabout around Africa to learn about the culture, his people, and all that kind of stuff. And so, that really inspired me. That was in the back of my mind pretty much, throughout my adult life. But I never saw that as something being viable or real until I went through this crisis where I had to decide two paths in my life. And I decided to go on the path of life.
That's amazing. And the sort of before that, what were you doing?
So I was a fitness instructor and a personal trainer. I actually have my own studio downtown Toronto, and I would basically program these really large boot camps for people as well. So it was like these hardcore kind of boot camps in training people, and that came from because of my love for track and field. And I transitioned from track and field, and I wanted to stay in fitness. I wanted to stay in something that kept me fit, and I can help other people achieve their fitness goals. And so I decided to go into this fitness life that I led.
Oh wow! And so you're here. You decide to fly to Cape Town. You been planning this for 9 months, and you sort of land. You've got. Did you know how long it was going to take you, or was there no sort of time constraint on it? You wanted to experience every moment, and didn't matter how long it took.
Well, so before I went to Cape Town, I actually did a couple of practice runs. So I walked from one city to the next, and that city was about 75 kilometers apart. 35 kilometers apart in Hamilton, from Toronto to Hamilton. And that took me about 14 hours to walk. I had no idea what I was doing. I was wearing Converse shoes. Like, it was just really bad. And a couple of months leading up to the Crossing Africa expedition, I was invited by my friend to, she challenged me. She said, "Hey, why don't you train?" Because she's a speed walking coach, and she does like super long endurance speed walks. And she said, "Listen, why don't you do a walk with me from Toronto to Montreal, which is 500 plus kilometers. Took me 14 days, and I'll train you with everything that you need to know." And so we did a lot of overtraining in terms of like walking 50 kilometers, 40 plus kilometers. Like, we're talking massive days that took like 20 hours sometimes. And I needed that in order to survive some of the harsher conditions in Eastern Africa, because you don't want to be distracted by walking when you're distracted by so many other things. And I remember just a couple of months before Africa, a lot of people started to realize, like, now this is becoming real because this guy's training for it, he's advertising for it. They put me on the news, local news. So I was like, all right, now I absolutely must do this. And my mom bought me a ticket, and she said, "This is your birthday ticket." So on my 30th birthday, I flew down to Cape Town.
And what was the feelings going through your mind when you sort of landed and just about to sort of prepare for this huge adventure?
Oh, it was surreal. It was really another experience. Like, first of all, my entire life, I've always wanted to go to Africa, experience Africa. And now that I get to do like, this kind of crazy exploration on this continent, was I was like, it was beyond my wildest dreams. So I was, of course, nervous, scared, excited. I felt all the feels that you could possibly feel. Um, but I remember when I landed and we went to the person who picked me up in Cape Town. We drove to like this bar in like the central area, and I remember feeling the sensation of like, I absolutely belong here. Everything makes sense. It's like, this is where I'm supposed to be.
And then from that bar, after being dropped off, you had probably your backpack and
That's it, yeah.
supplies, enough money for the 2 years, or was it sort of enough just to get sort of by, or sort of like by the end sort of scraping? What was the sort of plan in that respect? Because I sort of heard that which is, I think, a really good thing, especially on like your first one, is probably like my first big one, it was like, you try and get sponsored, no one's ever heard of you, no one thinks you can do it, so they will just pawn you off and just say, yeah, maybe when you come back, we'll hear about it. But and you just had no sponsorship for this big undertaking.
That's absolutely right. I had no sponsorship. In fact, I didn't really want sponsorship. I wanted to see if I was able to execute this on my own. And I was able to do that in a way that I was able to tell stories that I know that I wouldn't have been able to tell had I been sponsored. I didn't want to just go to like every beautiful hotel that was along the way. I wanted to camp out in the wild, and I wanted to have to do it the hard way. For me, it was kind of like a rites of passage, like like in the TV show, the TV show Black Panther. But it's also what a lot of tribal African people do as well, which is they go on this rites of passage in order to transition from childhood to adulthood. And so I wanted to do something similar, but I know that you needed to kind of suffer in order to see the glory.
Yeah, I think that's very true. I think you sort of said it so spot on in that respect. And so from Cape Town, you're moving up the East Coast, you're moving into all sorts of desolate places along the way after sort of leaving the major cities. How was the first sort of few weeks starting out for you?
So the second day, these kids just actually came in, they stole my wallet. And so that was a huge bummer because I thought, well, at least it happened earlier than later. But they took enough money where it really put a dent into my expedition. But it also transitioned me from going, because I had enough money saved for at least half of that expedition. And then the other half was, donated, or people helped me, or getting like free accommodation. So a lot of those things kind of like sustained me. And, the kid stealing my wallet was really a way for me to it forced me to become friendly with people, and to like, to introduce myself to random strangers and to people who don't even speak the language that I speak.
I think at the start, that's very sort of challenging to break out of the mold that you're comfortable with in other places, to sort of almost break free into what you really want. And that is to just be yourself to just be open, to be vulnerable in a sense as you
100%.
move. And
Yeah. I mean, I feel like you have to throw yourself into these situations. A lot of people will probably like say, "Oh, I'm not ready for this," or "I need to slowly develop some skills. I have to like hype myself." No, you're never going to get it if you do it this way. You just have to literally throw yourself in, go through a lot of mistakes, and through those mistakes is how you learn.
yeah, it's so true. And so from there, you're sort of moving up the East Coast. You've been robbed on your second day. And then, so you're probably thinking, oh, is this the start of big things, or it can only get better from here? So how did it sort of go
I,
from there?
you know what? Psychologically, I told myself that this is beyond just one incident. If me getting robbed right now is gonna stop me or slow me down, I believe that there were so many things ahead of me that would challenge me so greatly that, for me, I made it become not a big deal at all. I thought to myself, you know what? Um, this is gonna be a situation that I need to be able to deal with even in the future, because I could get robbed halfway through or near the end of my expedition. I can get shot at, I can get arrested, I can, a lot of these different things can happen, and they have happened. And so I needed to prepare my mind. If I wasn't ready that time on the second day, then there's no way that I would have continued going on, moving forward.
And sort of moving up, did you have other issues in South Africa? I mean, food, water?
So, there were definitely food and water shortages. Remember, I'm quite new to all of this, right? So I'm like literally learning all of this on the spot. Like as I'm walking, I'm like, oh man, like I'm like Googling and YouTubing literally as I'm walking how to do certain things, how to tie knots, how to make sure that you retain as much water as possible. And these are the only reason I learned those things on the spot is because I didn't realize that you have to know certain things before I went on the expedition. Like there's only so much that people can give you tips on or that you can learn, within 9 months. And so there are things that happen that I didn't even know that I needed to do, like, how to collect, how to catch fish, how to collect prawns, scraping oysters, all those different kinds of things like that. So like getting shells and digging at the top of beaches to see if there's any fresh water, filtering water without a water filter, like all these different things were a challenge that I had to learn on the spot. And again, South Africa was a really good place to learn this because I I went to the country that was, to me, the most inviting in terms of, there's a lot of people who are speaking English. It has like a very Euro Africa vibe. And, for the large part of it, it's actually quite developed, especially along the coast. And so for me, I kind of like was able to make a lot of these mistakes. So, I ran into a few snakes, like a puff adder and a black mamba snake, those things, like the black mamba snake on the side of the road, I thought was a massive car tire, like from the trucks. And, I started to approach this thing and it was just like this long black slithering thing. And I'm just like, oh, it's just part of a tire. And all of a sudden it started like moving towards me. And I'm like, what the actual heck is going on? And, obviously it didn't get me because I'd be dead right now. But, I was able to avoid getting bit by or attacked by a black mamba snake. I stepped on puff adder snakes. I've met elephants, and I've met some people who weren't very welcoming to me. In places where I would camp out in the wild. So it was a really intense experience. But I think the most dangerous parts were really like crossing the dozens and dozens of rivers that I've had to cross, that to me was the most dangerous. We're talking about like crocodile, you know, up the stream, and then like sharks doing figure eights, waiting out on the shores for the fresh water, for the fresh fish to come out. So it was just really like a very it's a very surreal and very harsh experience at the beginning, but it really toughened me up for the rest of the journey.
For people who aren't sort of familiar with the geography of the East Coast, you sort of went South Africa, Swaziland, is that right? And then and then up that sort of route into Mozambique.
Yeah. So I went up. I stayed along the east. I stayed along the east coast, and basically, I tried to stay on the beach on the coastal line as much as possible. There were parts along the Transkei or the Wild Coast that it was kind of nearly impossible for me to traverse. Well, not impossible, but I needed like rope climbing gear and all that kind of stuff, which I didn't have, or like a mini boat. And from there, I crossed over into Mozambique. Yeah.
And what was because you'll have to forgive me, but they at the moment, I think, are in a sort of civil war at the moment. And so what was the reception you sort of got when you arrived? Because this is going back quite a few years. And I usually, as you say, when you sort of go into these places, there's a sort of fear and anticipation, but sometimes the locals are usually very sort of open and welcoming to sort of people that arrive. What was the reception that you got in Mozambique?
So when I arrived into Mozambique, it was incredibly warming. These people were so incredibly hospitable. It was kind of like my first real experience of like Black Africans really inviting me into their homes. I didn't really have that much of a reception from Black Africans in South Africa. There was this thing, called xenophobia, where South Africans were, feeling threatened of other African people coming in and taking their jobs and working for a lot of the white South Africans, and because there's this mistrust between them, right? And so they seek workers from outside of South Africa. And so I look like I could be one of those people, like maybe I'm Mozambican or something like that. But what made Mozambique really an incredible experience was yes, first of all, the people were incredibly hospitable, friendly. It was one of the first places where I actually got to sleep in communities and in people's homes that were random strangers that I just met right there on the street. That never happened in South Africa. And so that was a really incredible experience. And when I made it to Maputo, which is the capital of Mozambique, they actually did like a 7-minute series of me in Portuguese, which was really cool. So the whole country got to see this crazy guy who's walking the length of Africa. And as soon as that came out, I was like really popular on the road. People would like honk their cars. People would literally every 5 minutes, people would stop their car, take a selfie, and carry on. There would be people in villages, like literally random villages, who would come out and say like, "Good morning, Mr. Rigby," and I'd be like, "What the heck is going on right now?" Like, who would have ever thought that you would just like wake up in the middle of a village and they all know you, and and also another thing too is I forgive me for forgetting his name, but the former president of Mozambique, who was the one who made Mozambique independent, apparently me and him looked very similar with my beard out, and I had a gap tooth, and so that former president, he looked very similar to me. So people would either stop me because of that, or they would stop me because I look like their former president.
That probably worked quite nicely in your favor.
Yeah, I did.
And so sort of going around there, you sort of speak passionately about Mozambique. Is there sort of an amazing moment that you can recall from that sort of time there? Like from one of the locals inviting you in, a sort of moment that you sort of cherish?
There were a lot of those kinds of moments. Like it's more about choosing which moment. Like I could talk about like a random village where like this matriarchal community invited me into their homes, and like completely random strangers, and the compound is like full of women, and they trusted me and they brought me into their home, and I was able to pitch my tent on this like beautiful compound that's just like with this beautiful rich Mozambican soil. And I remember we had a dinner, and we had this fire circle, and the whole family was there, and it was just so peaceful. And you look up into the sky, and you just see the Milky Way in like the clearest possible form that you could see it, like with all its like insane stars, just like billions of them just shining right down at you. And so you feel so connected, not just to our galaxy, to the universe, but also to other people who are complete random strangers. But it made you feel like, we're not random strangers. We are all in this together. We've just kind of on this planet separated ourselves and forgotten that we all come from, the same family.
No, very true. And then as you sort of made your way through Mozambique, you had a little incident with a truck. Is that right?
Yeah. So what ended up happening was I got picked up by Mozambican government soldiers, and they essentially forced me into the back of their military truck because there is this zone in which you cannot cross. And so, I needed transport to go from across this conflict zone. It's just about 100 kilometers or so. And, this convoy was going through, and they picked me up, and we're moving like really fast on this road, this beautiful road, palm trees on the side. But what makes it surreal is that, it was during sunset. But what made it really surreal was like, it was just so beautiful. And then you could see like cars that were just recently blown up, and just like smoke coming, like chimneys, like smoke chimneys everywhere. But those were like little villages that were being burned, or cars that were being burned, or bullet holes everywhere. It was just like, what is going on? And I remember like all of a sudden, the truck stops, and then we hear like, first we hear the AK-47 bullets like pop, 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 pop. The truck stops, and all of a sudden I'm thinking like, what is going on right now? This is not what I signed up for. And so what happened was these villagers were shooting at us, who are, they've joined forces with Renamo, which is the, a faction of the government that's gone basically, fighting against the official government. And so Renamo's forces were shooting at us because they thought we were all military, right? I look kind of like I'm military, and I'm on a military truck. So they're firing at us, and then they started firing back. And this lasted for about 20 minutes. And I ended up recording this entire incident. Well, not the entire incident, but definitely like the first part of it. Just from my phone. And I did it in the back of the truck. Realized that, okay, they could just RPG this truck because I saw all these other trucks that were blowing up. So I jumped out of the truck and started recording from the tall grass where I hid, and started recording this entire incident.
Wow. Luckily, they didn't think you're the ex-president.
Well, yeah. Well, then maybe I would have been actually saved, because that president was actually loved by both sides.
Oh, really? He was sort of holding the country together in a sense.
Yeah, he was the first one to make Mozambique an independent country. So everywhere you go, there's like a statue or something of him.
Oh, wow. Amazing. And so from that sort of very, mixed, amazing times and sort of quite hairy times, you sort of moved your way up probably then into sort of Zimbabwe, Tanzania, Kenya area?
Yeah, so I missed Zimbabwe. I was supposed to go into Zimbabwe, but instead I decided to go towards Malawi. And from Malawi, that's where I decided to kayak because that lake goes from south to north. And I thought to myself, this is a perfect opportunity to to go up this lake and really experience proper indigenous and remote places that most people have never been to before, or places where people have literally never seen a foreigner before, particularly children. And so, yeah, I went through Malawi, and then from Malawi, I crossed over into Tanzania.
And so from Malawi, you, as you said, you decided to kayak up. That's quite a long route for anyone listening.
Yeah, it took me 2 months to kayak.
That's an incredible feat. And how did the sort of canoe sort of come about? Did you just buy one or?
Yeah, so it was funny because I met this Italian guy, and he his name is Francesco, and he was an incredible friend, a really good friend, and we met at a hostel in Mozambique in Maputo, and we met about a couple of weeks afterwards in another town. He was already there for 2 weeks, but it took me 2 weeks to get there by foot, right? So by the time I got there, he's like, "Oh yeah, like I just remember you doing this walking thing." And so I arrived, and we became really close. And he suggested, he's like, "Hey, listen, why don't like you try kayaking, and I will walk Malawi." So we decided to switch it up. So instead of me walking Malawi, I decided to kayak Malawi, which was actually already part of the plan. So the original plan for crossing Africa was to walk, paddle, and sail across the continent. But I ended up just walking and kayaking, which is way harder. But because the sailing part, I could have just sailed the entire part, right? And so he was walking the length of it, and I was kayaking, and we would cross paths once in a while. But I would always be a few days ahead of him because it was just better in a straight line to go in a single direction when he had to like crisscross and go through over mountains and whatnot. So there were a lot of times where I was in jams, and he was able to help me get out of it.
God, that's incredible. And so you're sort of paddling around, and then what? Just sort of camping on the beach as you sort of head on up, picking up supplies along the way, and then
So I would do it that way. So like there were times where I would I would have like 20 bananas with me, like mini bananas, like already like they're all like still attached to this to the stump or whatever, and dried foods. There weren't really that many selections of food throughout Malawi, and particularly in the places that I went to, just because poverty is a real thing over there for some particularly remote areas. And the World Bank ranked Malawi as one of the poorest countries in the world. Whether that's true or not, it's definitely evident that I had on that, like in Malawi itself, I lost the most amount of weight because I could only eat what the local people eat, right? So I would like, there's no way I'm not driving in a truck where I can store a bunch of stuff and eat that. But no, I was literally just eating whatever the locals would be eating. And sometimes even like alcohol was like my fuel because that was all some of the villages had. So I would do that too. And then there I would pitch my kayak in so many different places, like little islands, rocky islands, beaches, marshlands, which are the most dangerous because you never know if a crocodile or hippo is going to come at you. And I've had to sleep next to hippos before, so that was an experience on its own. Or you might just pitch your kayak in a place that where people just really aren't really nice to foreigners or strangers, or they might worship you. I don't know. It can go either way. You never know. It's like rolling dice.
It's that thing. Sometimes people are afraid of what they don't know, and so someone rocking up in a kayak, never done, but probably very rarely done, would be like, "What? Why is this guy here?"
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah. They would question. So superstition is like a real thing, and so they would question like why. Why are you doing these things? We've never seen someone that looks like you doing these kinds of expeditions before, or they wouldn't even call it expedition, but we've never seen anyone that looks like you doing these kinds of sporting adventures.
Amazing. And so from there, did your friend carry on with you, or at the
So,
end
yeah.
of Lake Malawi, did he call it a day and you carried on then up?
No, he actually, we crossed into the border together. And as we got closer to the border, we ended up picking up friends along the way. So we've had, there were times where we've had like three other people join us. So there was at least six of us at one point. And it's funny because, we ended up, sometimes reaching places at different times, but then we would stay together for a week. Like, for instance, in this kind of like backpacker in Malawi, and he ended up falling for this one girl, and she decided to just join him. So she joined him while he's joining me on my expedition, and they ended up falling in love, and she carried all the way through. So she walked for about a week and a half across Malawi, and they, funny enough, they ended up marrying last year, actually. So, it was really a match made in heaven, really.
Well, there's a story for you.
Yeah, exactly. It's like a separate story within a story. It's pretty incredible.
God, that's amazing to hear. And
Mhm.
and then yeah, so you're sort of moving on from Lake Malawi into, where are you going from there? You're going into Tanzania, or
So yeah, so I crossed over into Tanzania. This is where I suffered probably the most amount of pain. So I've already lost a lot of weight. Malawi is really known for malaria, and particularly cerebral malaria. And a lot of the people there, particularly the children, they suffer from tuberculosis and malaria, AIDS infections and stuff like that. And so there's really it's a really high death rate in amongst the youth in rural areas where remote medical units can't reach. However, that's changing, I think, quickly, and then there's a lot more support, but it's still pretty bad. And so I contracted malaria, cerebral malaria, which is the worst kind that you can get, and it was so bad. And I remember crossing the border. I happened to cross the border at the same time that there were these two German girls who I met at the same hostel where Francesco had met his love, and we were hanging out. We didn't know each other for too long, but we were happy that we had crossed the border together, and I started to feel a little bit woozy, and they were nurses, so they said like, hey, listen, I think you have malaria, we need to take you to the hospital. So they ended up taking me to the hospital, taking care of me. We ended up actually spending over a week together. They made sure that I was okay, making sure that you know that I wasn't like passing out, and getting the proper medical care. They even made sure that they communicated with my mom and everything like that. So it was, again, that was a really, really scary moment where I thought that, yeah, my life was like kind of, it was just like almost like a flash. Like it was just like withering away in the most painful possible way.
God. And so what, you rested up just on the outskirts, well, yeah, just on the edge of Tanzania before sort of, and what, so it must have taken you quite a few weeks to sort of recover from that to sort of persevere on.
It did, actually. And so in those 3 weeks, I decided to call it off for a bit, just for a few weeks. And I ended up going detouring to Zanzibar. And Zanzibar is on the coast. So, but my walk was actually through the middle of Tanzania. And so I decided to go to Zanzibar for a bit, and it was really such a magical experience. Like, Zanzibar is just this beautiful, lush island that has so much history with, the Ottoman Empire, like the Omani people who ruled there. And then there's like the East African slave trade that happened there too. And there's a lot of evidence of trade between India, the Middle East, the Chinese, the British, et cetera, et cetera. So it was really like an incredible cultural experience, but also just a leisure, like just chilling out.
Yeah.
So it's like a good time for me to chill out from getting shot at, from getting arrested, and from getting malaria. So I needed a break.
Yeah, well, you're sort of near the equator now. You're sort of heading up towards Tanzania and Kenya. Was it quite sort of quick through there? How did you sort of find?
It was. Hmm. So Tanzania was actually the quickest. Kenya was the quickest country I crossed. Tanzania was started to get pretty quick too. As soon as I got out of Malawi and further along the road in Tanzania, it was really, they had a very one simple road that went through Tanzania, and then that road connected also in Kenya, and that's where I think through Kenya was the quickest walk that I've done in, I think, any other country, just because like there was so much infrastructure already there. Like, you could go from one guest house to the next. You don't even have to think about it. Like, to me, coming from what I've already come from, it was like, oh my God, there's a guest house. This is super easy for me now. Of course, there were parts where, like in Marsabit, which is the desert, where it was actually quite difficult to still traverse, and you still needed to do some proper survival things in order to traverse those parts.
And were you going sort of the Naivasha, Nakuru, or are you going up the coast towards sort of Diani, Mombasa, Malindi, that sort of route?
No, I went through the middle, and so I had to cross. I had to cross Kilimanjaro and Mount Kenya, and as I crossed Mount Kenya, I actually ended up climbing up Mount Kenya. So that was like another really cool experience as well. In fact, Africa is like the first place where I actually learned how to climb mountains. I climbed the first mountain in Malawi, the second mountain in Kenya.
Oh wow! No, it's an incredible sort of around that sort of place, like Laikipia and Anuki. It's sort of just very sort of beautiful scenery, and you must have got some incredible sunsets and sunrises as you walk through.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I could tell you the best sunsets in Eastern Africa for sure.
What, in Kenya?
Well, I would say, yeah, Kenya is really nice. I would say the most beautiful sunsets I've seen were in the Transkei, close to Mozambique, in Malawi and Mozambique probably. And I think it's just where Africa is situated in those regions. It's just like kind of like, close, like south of the equator. You realize the sunsets are slightly different than what's in the north of the equator.
Yeah. It's really interesting. And what must have been quite strange is going from Kenya into, I imagine it's either Somalia or Sudan, South Sudan, to sort of a complete change of culture, scenery, more, it was becoming probably more and more desolate, desert area, barren. Is that how you found it?
Well, yeah. So before I got into Sudan, it was Ethiopia, right?
Oh, sorry,
And
yeah, Ethiopia, yeah.
And Ethiopia was actually incredibly populated. And I think Ethiopia was the first place where I had major culture shock. It was just so much. Like, I'm going into restaurants and, I met this group of these local women, and they're literally feeding me food with their hands and stuffing it in my mouth, And I've been with I've hung out with these rebel soldiers, former soldiers, who fought the regime. It was just like this regime who fought the government, sorry. And they were, camping with me just because they thought it was such a cool story of what I'm doing that they wanted to join me for a couple of days. And so we did. And, this grown man who has like a gun in one hand, he has a gun in one hand. And in the other hand, he's eating the food and he's feeding me this food. And I was just like, you can't even make this stuff up, man. This is next level.
I know, with his left hand? Is that?
Let's see. He had his left hand with the gun, and then the right hand was feeding me.
So when you had it with your left hand, I was like,
I even have a video of him. I can't wait to put all the footage together and put something out there for everyone to see. But there's footage of him actually laughing, kind of like a hyena, because he had smoked marijuana for the first time, of which I don't know where I got the marijuana from, but I gave it to him. I'm like, why not? Why not give a rebel soldier with a gun in his hand in a tent in the middle of nowhere some marijuana and see what happens? And so it ended up being really fun, though.
You obviously loved it.
Oh yeah.
And then so you're now sort of moving up Ethiopia. You've had a bit of a shock into that, but did you find South Sudan was a bit more of a culture shock in terms of isn't South Sudan under Sharia law? Sharias.
So it's actually so Northern Sudan. So Southern Sudan I couldn't get into. It was just too bad. Like, it was just bombarded with civil conflict. So I wasn't really allowed to go into there. I could, but then I wouldn't be able to get into the other countries. So some of the moves were strategic. If I could have it my way, I would have gone through Somalia via Kenya on the coast. So, but I couldn't go on the coast, so I had to merge inland. Which then took me to Ethiopia because it's landlocked. Because it's like Eritrea is what takes the coast. So I would have gone Somalia, Eritrea, Ethiopia, South Sudan, and then Sudan, but I couldn't have done those trips. So I did Ethiopia straight into Sudan, which is Sharia law, yeah, and it was my first kind of Sharia law experience. In fact, the first day that I made it up, I was wearing shorts, and I was stopped by some special agents who literally made me right on the spot change my pants to long pants.
Oh wow, God.
Yeah.
And what was your experience in Sudan like, moving up?
Whew. Well, Sudan shocked me, but in a different way than Ethiopia did. Ethiopia shocked me because it was just so overwhelmingly, cultural. But Sudan was overwhelming in terms of how hospitable and how beautiful the people were. It was probably one of the most inviting places I've ever been to in my life. Like, everywhere you go, everyone's trying to like accommodate you, feed you, whatever you need, and yeah, it was such a crazy, beautiful experience to be there. Um, but I would say those were the small pockets of my experience. The larger pockets were just open desert. Like we're talking like the white desert, and walking from Khartoum to Moyale, up to the white desert was probably one of the loneliest walks as well. Like there is a highway, but it's just surrounding with desolate land. And the places that saved me really were just gas stations, right? So there would be like these kind of like makeshift gas stations along the way, and they always had food, they always had something. So, and if they weren't available at the time, then you know they'd be around the next day.
Wow. Yeah, it's and I suppose that training that you did in South Africa, water
Hmm.
replenishing, all sorts to stop the sort of
Yeah.
dehydration must have come in handy by now.
Oh, 100%. Yeah.
And as you sort of moved up, what was your sort of feelings like? Because you've probably been going now for a year and a half or so.
About a year and a half. Yeah.
And so are you sort of still with that huge sense after a year and a half, with that enthusiasm that you had at the start? Or as you come to the end, is it more like, I just need to complete this?
I never felt like I just need to complete this because there was always something incredibly interesting coming ahead. I mean, Ethiopia in itself was insanely interesting. In fact, I'm always like, oh man, I want to stay longer, but I have a mission. I felt the same way in Sudan. I felt I wish I could see more of the pyramids. There are over 200 pyramids. There are more pyramids there than there are in Egypt. Um, and some of them predate a lot of the pyramids in Egypt. So I was able to visit archaeological sites that were over 3,000 years old. I got to see ancient temples and places that not a lot of people get to see, or a lot of places that people haven't even heard of that they don't even know exist. But these are like major ancient societies that have existed, and we know nothing about them. To me, that just like blew my mind. And I could just walk freely in these compounds where there's like huge marble slabs of statues, and there's no security, there's no entrance fees. It's just this open place. um, and so I decided. So I was literally camping along the way in these ancient sites. Um, so there was always something interesting to see and to experience, and it was always different. And that's kind of the beauty about Africa, is that there are some homogenous communities, of course, but they're also slightly different, in the sense that like the terrain changes. There's a lot of I started from the most southern tip of Africa to the north, and there are varying climate and weather patterns that change throughout that time, but also the seasons change. So I'm literally walking through seasons, and I'm walking up, and the temperature is getting like hotter and hotter and hotter and hotter, or it's changing to something else. I got to the point where the temperature was like 50 degrees, which is mind-bogglingly hot. And we're talking like, like I think I had wet clothes and they dried within like a couple of minutes. That's how hot it was. It was incredible. So yeah, no, it keeps you busy, and I never really felt like I wanted to completely end it until I made it near the end of Egypt. That's kind of where I started to feel like, okay, I need to finish this now.
And so where did you finish, and what was the sort of feelings like as you came to the end?
So ideally, I wanted to finish in Alexandria, because that's just on the coast. I wanted to go from water to water, but it was good enough for me to be like, South Africa to Egypt. I don't have to like specifically go to the coast, and also I ended up making it to Cairo. Sorry, what's it called? To Cairo. Where are the pyramids?
Cairo.
Yes, in Cairo, but it's a place within Cairo.
Oh, right.
Anyways, so forgive the name forgetting, but so I made it to Giza, and by the time I made it to Giza, I thought to myself, like, this is where the journey ends. It's just so spectacular. The fact that there's these ancient pyramids that have been around for like 4,000 years, and they're just like so dominant. I ended up just booking a hostel there that overlooks the pyramids from a roof deck. And I said to myself, this is the place where I'm going to end my journey.
There are moments when you're sort of doing these sort of point-to-point trips where even just before you find that sort of euphoric place which just has the fitting end to it. And you had that there. I mean, I imagine it was boiling hot. You're sort of, as you say, on this sort of outskirts of Cairo. What were the sort of noises and the sort of sounds around you?
It was quite busy. So Cairo is a very aggressively busy city. It can be very overwhelming if you're not used to that. And I wasn't really. I'm coming from like really quiet villages. Like I'm walking through, because I'm walking along the River Nile at this point now from Sudan. So starting from the White Desert is when I started to follow the River Nile, and I made it all the way up until Giza, where it just got really intensely busy. Like, people just like selling you things and, trying to haggle you. And, it's just, especially Old Cairo. Old Cairo is incredibly busy. It's such an ancient city that's built on top of another ancient city. That's just like a new city is on top of the old city. It's really intense to be there. But me being in Giza, at this hostel overlooking the pyramids was actually one of the more peaceful places that I could have gone to.
And a fitting end to finish your South to North Africa trip.
100%, yeah.
Nice. And sort of from that, I mean, you've gone on to sort of do these incredible, trips from cycling across Canada, and you've got more on the horizon, as we spoke about before the podcast. And, when those happen, we'll sure you get you back. But it has been such an incredible story that you've just told.
The story across Africa?
Yeah, that story.
Yeah, that so yeah, I mean, I sometimes reflect and I look back. Actually yesterday, I think I looked at a photo, and it was just like a random photo, that came up on my reminders or like a memory thing on Google. And I was thinking like, wow, that time, I remember the feeling that I had when I was in that place. And that feeling was just like that overwhelming, that euphoric feeling of like, we're all together in this on Earth. And that feeling of that Earth is is a home. Like it really feels like a home. And when you have that feeling, you don't want to exploit people or land, or you don't want to hoard things for yourself. You want to share. And this is a feeling, an experience that I want everyone to feel. And I think it's just for the goodness of yourself, because I think you can, feeling gratitude is always a great feeling, but it's also something that, that transmits to other people that you interact with. And hopefully that can spread. And I don't know, feel like the world could be a great place that way.
So very true. So very true. Well, Mario, thank you so much for coming on today. I mean, there's a part of the show where we ask the same 5 questions to each guest each week.
All right.
With the first being, what was the one gadget that you always take on these sort of expeditions?
A duct tape, a knife, and a rope.
Okay. A rope for...
Yeah. Well, the rope.
Yeah.
What's that for?
Yeah.
So you'd be surprised. Actually, every time I have to use the rope, I'm like, man, I'm so happy I brought this. I mean, it could be anything like you could be scaling a cliff, for instance, and my backpack would be too large. So I would just tie a rope and then I would lift the backpack from the top of the hill. I used the rope for tying it around my waist and an inflatable kind of floaty where I put my backpack in. That's how I crossed rivers. Or I would use it for lining my clothes, for laundry. I would use it for all different kinds of things, really. Like, I mean, yeah.
Well, there you go. Always bring a rope.
Yeah. Always bring a rope, yeah. I mean, I brought a rope, especially on my kayaking trips as well, because then you could carry things, then it will float behind you. It's just, there's so many uses for it. Duct tape as well for blisters, for sealing torn clothes or the tent, for sealing the tent that has any ripped parts to it. And then, of course, the knife is self-explanatory. You need that for survival purposes.
Yeah, a knife is always pretty important, I always think, on these sort of trips.
Oh, yeah.
What about your favorite adventure or travel book?
So, I mean, I was reading the book. What's it called again? Very popular. Small book. Everyone read it. The Alchemist.
Oh, yeah.
It was a really interesting story because it was kind of like how I was going through this adventure, which is, it's just a very innocent lead up into the adventure. And then that led to like all these amazing and beautiful experiences that led to lessons that I've learned along the way.
What would you say really important? What was the one lesson do you feel that you took from that trip?
That I think humanity is I think we're all inherently good before we're bad. We're taught to be bad.
Yeah. Yeah, I probably agree with that. Why are these adventures important to you?
I think so. They're important to me because, humanity's always needed to explore, and you have it in your blood to explore, or you don't. And in me, like ever since I was a kid, as I explained earlier, I was just kind of like a wild child going out into the bush and learning how to survive out there. But we need a new narrative of exploration, and we need to put ourselves on the map so that we can show that there is diversity in the exploration world, so that we can show that people can look different ways. Gone are the times where the white European goes to Africa and says and exploits the people in a way that shows that African people are not useful, knowledgeable, or have anything to share with us. I think African people have so much to share, and I've learned so much about humanity. And I think that if we come together and we share our knowledge and experiences, the world would be we would progress so incredibly fast. Knowledge and wisdom come together.
Yeah, I think we had Benedict Allen on, and he this sort of, as you say, the move away from the sort of past exploration to the sort of new is about sort of just learning and understanding rather than exploiting, in a sense. And so,
or conquering.
yeah, that sort of sense. But the sort of sense of you just sort of learn so many different things. As you say, he went out to Papua New Guinea and he was there with this tribe in the middle of the rainforest that no one's really ever seen. And with it, he just went there and didn't go with any sort of expectation or knowledge of them. And from it, all he wanted to do was just learn. He just wanted to understand. He wasn't going there to say, oh, you shouldn't do that, you shouldn't do this. It was just observing and then sort of seeing different parts of it.
Yeah, that's beautiful, and I love to hear those stories. And I'm really and I love how the exploration world is changing into that mindset now. Like I'm seeing a lot more women explorers as well, and that's great to see. That I'm not saying that they've been given opportunities, but they're taking the opportunities, and that's a wonderful thing.
Yeah, I agree. What about your favorite quote?
Get out, be brave, and see the world.
Who said that?
I'm not sure. I'm not sure who said that. Get out, be brave, and see the world. I don't know. I could have made it up. I don't know, but I mean, you can double check it. But
I could put your name below it if you like.
You could, yeah. I mean, hold on. Let me search it right now, real quick. Get out, be brave, and see the world. Because I'm one of those people that like I always say these kinds of things, and people say like, "Whoa, that's a great quote," and I forget every single time.
Yeah, I know what you mean. You sort of see a quote, forget about it, and then you sort of reel it off like it was your own, and you're like, I think I might have just read that somewhere.
Well, I don't see it anywhere.
Okay, well there we go. Brand new quote.
Yeah, so yeah, it might be. Yeah, it might be. Oh wait, I do see it. However, guess what? It's a photo of me. Someone put a photo of me with literally just that quote.
Oh, really?
Yeah, that's so funny.
Well, there you go. You're right. Your own personal quote.
Yeah, so it's mine. And if not, then I don't feel bad. Like it's just whatever. It's what's important is that we share that sentiment.
Finally, what are you doing now? Oh, wait, no, that's not the one I wanted to ask. It was for people listening. What's the one piece of advice you would give them for, people wanting to do what you have done?
I think, in order to do what you really love to do, you're going to have to take a leap of faith, and you have to trust in this leap. Hence the faith. And the people around you are most likely going to be against what you want to do because they themselves are afraid of jumping into this frontier that is unknown. It's not taught to us in school. And so if this is something you want to do, look outside of the parameters of what school education tells you how to learn, tells you what to do. Look outside of the general wisdom of your friends and family, and look at the wisdom and knowledge of the people that you really admire. Look at what they say and really take their words to heart. Even me saying this right now, it's the truth. And that truth is, you have to take a leap of faith. You have to take a risk. And that risk is just something not a lot of people are willing to do. And that's why the few people who do those things that they love to do are rewarded tremendously for it. Whether that's through life experience or wealth or just basically just the love of doing that. That's something you can only get if you take that big risk.
You have to
and
sorry.
And I was going to add to that too. There's no perfect timing. There's literally no such thing as perfect timing. If you feel completely underprepared, that's probably the perfect time. If you feel super scared and you have anxiety, that's probably the perfect time. What matters the most is going through with it and seeing it to the end.
Trust in the process.
That's it. Trust the process.
And Mario, how can people follow you and your adventures and whatever you're doing next?
Well, I'm quite active on social media. So Instagram, which is at Mario Rigby. You can follow me on Facebook or on my website, which is www.mariorigby.com. And there I have, basically all my expeditions laid out in detail in blog form as well. So I've also written a lot of blogs, and you'll see a lot of the videos that I've uploaded onto YouTube. That's all on my website, or you can go on my YouTube. But at the moment, right now, Instagram, YouTube are my two biggest platforms.
And I suppose everyone listening is wondering what's next.
Well, what's next is, you know what, I'm kind of supposed to keep it a secret, but I can vaguely tell you that there might be a TV show coming out, and that's going to be pretty epic because, you know, it's doing what I really love to do. And it's, again, about like just really highlighting diversity in exploration. And then there's going to be some sailing around the world because I have some expeditions coming up in the near future where I want to sail across the Atlantic Ocean. And so, you know, I'll be doing some training this year. And an expedition called the Lucayan Trail Expedition, which is a traverse of the Bahama Islands, you know, retracing the roots and the history of the Lucayan people, which have been wiped out. And I'll be kayaking the entire length of the Bahamas, from Turks and Caicos to Miami, using purely only the kayak.
Amazing. Well, I'm sure everyone listening will be following along and checking out your Instagram and YouTube, seeing those videos that you've been talking about on the podcast.
Yeah.
Well,
I hope so. Thank you so much for showing that.
Oh, no worries. Well, it's been such a pleasure listening to your stories, and I can't thank you enough for coming on today, really.
Well, thank you, John, and thank you all for listening.
Well, that is it for today. Thank you so much for listening, and I hope you got something out of it. If you did, hit that like button and subscribe if you haven't already. And I will see you in the next video.